The obese girl's Christmas cookie was laughed at by the town, until a rancher said, "It tastes like home." Winter lay over Bramble Ridge like a thick quilt, muffling the sounds of the small town and coating every rooftop in a soft layer of white. Lights twinkled from lampposts wrapped in garlands, and wreaths hung on every shop door. It was the evening of the annual Christmas bake-off, a night that always brought the whole town out, except those who had ever been made to feel unwelcome. Emily Hart stood on the brick path beside the town square, her breath fogging in front of her. Her wool coat strained around her broad frame, and her boots crunched in the snow as she shifted her weight nervously. In her mittened hands she carried a tray wrapped carefully in red and white cloth. Beneath it rested her special creation, the spice-kissed snowflake cookie, a recipe passed down from her grandmother, and the one thing Emily could make that seemed to silence the ache of being laughed at. The closer she came to the square, the louder the music grew, old fiddle tunes, bells jingling, children shrieking as they played in the snow. Emily whispered to herself, "It's Christmas. Maybe this year will be different." She didn't believe it, but saying it helped her take another step. Town square was buzzing. Tables were lined up beneath strings of golden lights that crisscrossed the area like glowing spiderwebs. Bakers from all corners of Bramble Ridge displayed glossy pretzels, peppermint stacks, powdered sugar buns, treats made with expensive ingredients and even more expensive pride. Emily approached her small, undecorated table at the very end of the row. It had been the only one left. There were no welcome signs or cheerful greetings waiting for her. The cold wind met her instead. Still, she set down the tray and unwrapped the cloth. A small cloud of cinnamon and nutmeg rose into the air, soft and comforting. Mrs. Lorna Dale, her mouth pinched as if bracing for disappointment, swooped toward Emily like a hawk spotting prey. "Mrs. Lorna. Well, Emily, you made it. I suppose you're entering again?" Emily smiled politely. "Emily." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Lorna leaned closer, peering at the cookies like they were misbehaving children. "Mrs. Lorna. They're rustic, very homemade, very simple." Emily swallowed the familiar sting. "Emily, they taste nice. I worked hard on them." Lorna dismissively. "I'm sure you did, dear." As the woman clicked away on her heels, two teenage boys walked by. They snickered, elbows nudging each other. Boy 1. "Look, her cookies are shaped like her." Emily's heart clenched. She pretended she didn't hear. But the laughter spread, rippling through a few onlookers. Someone whispered, "Bless her heart, she tries." Another voice chimed, "She should stick to eating, not baking." Emily's chest tightened. She kept her gaze on her tray, blinking rapidly. Minutes passed. People strolled by, admiring the fancy pastries on nearby tables, but not one person paused at hers. She stood alone, again. Emily dug her hands into her pockets, trying to warm her fingers and her courage. Pastor Grant passed through the crowd and spotted her. His kind face softened. "Pastor Grant. Emily, those look delightful. I'll be back to try one, let me just check on the choir." He hurried off, but his attempt at kindness made her throat ache more. Emily whispered to her tray, "Gran, I wish you were here. You always said my baking had heart." Wind blew gently at her hair as if her grandmother heard. Suddenly the music cut for a moment as the crowd shifted. A murmur rippled through the square, people stepping aside, turning their heads. Emily looked up. A tall man in a worn leather coat walked out of the shadows where the lamplight met the night. His hat was dusted with snow, boots muddied from long roads. Broad shoulders, slow steps, presence like gravity. Caleb Warren. The rancher who kept to himself. The widower who rarely came to town except for feed or supplies. The man people whispered about but never approached. He paused at the edge of the square, scanning the rows of tables. Not with excitement. Not with hunger. With longing. And an old sorrow tucked behind his calm gaze. Emily froze. There was no reason, none in the world, that Caleb Warren would walk toward her small table. But he did. Not hurried. Not curious. Certain. His boots crunched softly as he approached, leaving a narrow trail in the snow. Emily's breath shortened. The crowd hushed in confusion. He stopped right in front of her table. Caleb lifted his eyes to her, blue like winter sky, warm like a barn lantern, and said in a deep, steady voice, "Caleb, you made these?" Emily nodded, gripping the edge of the table. "Emily." "Yes." Caleb studied the cookies closely. He didn't laugh. He didn't smirk. He didn't whisper to anyone. He reached out, carefully picking up a single cookie as though it were something fragile. Emily braced herself for the usual insult. But it didn't come. The entire square seemed to hold its breath. Caleb took one slow, quiet bite. Something changed in his eyes. Softened. Warmed. Till the wind stopped. The world paused. He looked at Emily, not at her size, not at her nervous hands, not at her awkwardness. He looked at her, and said the words that changed her life. Caleb, gentle, reverent. Well, I'll be. This tastes like home. The laughter died. The crowd stared. Emily's lips parted in stunned silence. It was the first kind thing anyone had said to her in years. And she wasn't sure how to breathe. For a long moment, Emily could not speak. The cold air pricked her cheeks, and the lights above her blurred as if she were underwater. Caleb Warren's words hovered in the air between them, gentle yet powerful. This tastes like home. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not about her baking. Not about her. Caleb took another slow bite, chewing thoughtfully, almost reverently, as though he were tasting a memory. Around them, the murmurs of the crowd grew. People leaned closer, whispering, "Is he serious? That's Caleb Warren?" "He never compliments anyone." Emily swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Emily, you're not joking, right? I mean, people usually—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The sentence that would have ended with "laugh at me." Caleb lifted his gaze to her, steady and quiet. "Caleb, I don't joke about things that feel like truth." Emily blinked fast, her heart hammering so loudly she wondered if the people around them could hear it. Mrs. Lorna Dale, who had been circling the crowd like a hawk watching for mice, stormed forward. Her heels clicked sharply against the icy bricks. "Mrs. Lorna. Caleb Warren. Surely you don't mean to say that her cookie is better than—" Caleb didn't raise his voice, but the firmness in it silenced Mrs. Lorna mid-stride. "Caleb, I said exactly what I meant." He took another bite. Emily almost grabbed the table to steady herself. Mrs. Lorna's eye twitched, her smile tightening like a too small bow. She huffed and turned away, calling out to another group in a bright, fake tone. "Mrs. Lorna. Move along, folks. Plenty of real baking to taste." But the crowd didn't move along. They stayed watching. A rancher's opinion mattered in a small western town. A widower ranchers? Even more. Folks treated widowers like they carried sacred grief, and their words carried weight like scripture. Caleb gestured toward the empty patch of ground beside Emily's table. "Caleb, mind if I stay here for a bit?" Emily swallowed. No man, not one, had ever asked to stand beside her. "Emily, I mean yes. I mean no, you can stay. If you want." Caleb's mouth tugged in a small smile. He stepped closer, the leather of his coat brushing lightly against her sleeve. The warmth of him softened the icy air. He set his gloved hands on the table, looking down at the cookies again. "Caleb, you made these with someone in mind, didn't you?" Emily blinked, startled by the accuracy of the question. "Emily, my grandmother. She passed last Christmas. These were her favorite." Caleb's expression gentled. "Caleb, loss. It leaves an empty room inside a man. Sometimes the smallest thing can open a door back into that room." He took a breath as if steadying himself. "Caleb, this cookie did that." Emily looked away quickly, tears threatening to slip free. She didn't want to cry in front of half the town. Just then a small girl, maybe 7 years old, tugged her mother's hand and approached shyly. "Girl. Miss Emily? Can I try one too?" Emily hesitated. Fear, old familiar fear, rose like a wave. What if the girl spat it out? What if she laughed? What? Caleb kneeled beside the child, offering her a gentle smile. "Caleb, you'll like it." Caleb believed in her cookie. So Emily handed the child one. The girl bit into it. A slow, sweet grin spread across her face like sunrise. "Girl, it tastes like Christmas." Her mother's eyebrows lifted. A teenage couple stepped closer. A man with frost in his beard rubbed his hands together, curious. Soon more people came, tentative, unsure, but drawn by Caleb's calm approval. One by one they tasted Emily's cookie. Soft murmurs changed from doubt, to surprise, to delight. Emily stood frozen in place, watching as the cookie no one wanted turned into the treat everyone sought. Behind her, Pastor Grant's voice floated over the crowd. "Pastor Grant, looks like your gift's finally shining, child." Emily couldn't even respond, she was too overwhelmed. Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Caleb, you've been overlooked for too long. All it took was someone actually tasting what you made with your heart." Emily turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "Emily, softly. You did that." Caleb shook his head. "Caleb. No. You did that. I just had the sense to slow down and see it. Emily felt something warm and fragile bloom inside her chest. The kind of feeling she didn't dare name yet. But she knew one thing. For the first time in her life, standing in the glow of the Christmas lights, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Because Caleb Warren had chosen to taste a cookie that everyone else mocked. And somehow, that taste had awakened something neither of them expected. Snowflakes drifted lazily down from the darkening sky, glowing under the lanterns strung across the town square. The crowd around Emily's table had thinned slightly, but people still hovered, curious, whispering in soft tones about the unexpected turn of events. Emily stood beside her tray, still reeling from what had just unfolded. She felt like the ground beneath her had shifted, softened, opened new paths she never imagined. Across from her, Caleb Warren brushed crumbs from his gloves, his face calm but his eyes carrying something deeper, something tender. He reached for another cookie. Emily blinked. She wasn't used to seeing anyone return for seconds, let alone thirds. Emily, you really don't have to keep eating them. I mean, you've already been kind enough. Caleb took the cookie anyway, held it like it held a memory, and took a slow, deliberate bite. His shoulders relaxed, a small breath escaping him as if something inside him unclenched. Caleb, my wife used to bake something like this. Emily's breath hitched. She hadn't expected him to speak of his grief so openly. Emily, softly. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Caleb looked at the snowflakes catching on his sleeves. Caleb, you couldn't have. I don't talk about her much. Folks mean well, but they look at me like I'm broken. Like I'll fall apart if they say her name. Emily nodded. She understood that feeling more than he realized, being seen only in pieces. Caleb continued. Caleb. She baked simple things. Nothing fancy. He lifted the cookie. Just like this. Not perfect to look at, but full of something that mattered. Emily's chest tightened. Her cookies had always been simple. People mocked them for being uneven, rustic, plain. Yet this man, this rancher, was finding comfort inside the very thing others ridiculed. A little boy tugged on Emily's apron. Boy. Miss Emily, I heard folks say you make cookies better than my mama. Can I try one too? Emily smiled, handing him one gently. Emily, of course. He bit it, his face lighting instantly. Boy. Whoa. It tastes warm. Laughter bubbled from the boy's chest, pure and genuine. His joy spread. Other children stepped closer, curious hands reaching. Emily hesitated for half a heartbeat, old insecurity clinging like shadows, but she pushed past it. She served each child with a smile. Nearby, townsfolk exchanged glances, surprised, impressed, confused. An older man, Mr. Pickett, scratched his head and muttered, Mr. Pickett. Never thought I'd see the day Emily Hart's cookies brought a crowd. His wife elbowed him sharply. Mrs. Pickett. Hush. Can't you see the girls finally shining? Pastor Grant walked up, hands folded behind his back, watching the scene with pride. Pastor Grant. Emily, my dear, you've touched this town more tonight than you realize. Emily lowered her eyes, embarrassed but glowing. Emily. I didn't do anything special. Caleb's voice came in steady and warm. Caleb. You made something honest. She lifted her eyes to him. Caleb. That's rare. Most people try to impress. But you're not trying to put on a show. You're giving people something from your heart. That's why it tastes different. Emily stared at him, unsure how to handle the weight of his sincerity. Emily. I never thought anyone would see that. Caleb tilted his head. Caleb. Maybe folks around here forgot how to look. Emily's throat tightened. He didn't say it to flatter her. He said it because he believed it. As the cookies dwindled, the crowd slowly trickled away, returning to the music, the lights, and the bustle of the festival. But some glanced back, glances of respect, not pity. A new feeling settled in Emily's chest. Not confidence exactly, but something budding. Something like possibility. Caleb set the last cookie on the table gently, then looked at her with quiet intensity. Caleb. I don't know what you've been told about yourself, Emily Hart, but folks have been blind. She looked away, tears swelling. Emily. It's not just what they say. It's how they look at me. Like I'm too big for the space I take. Too much of what they don't want. Caleb stepped closer, close enough that she felt his warmth through the cold night air. Caleb. You're not too much. He held her gaze. You're enough. More than enough. Her breath caught. The wind fluttered her hair. Lights flickered overhead. The snow seemed to fall slower around them. Emily opened her mouth to speak, anything, but footsteps approached. Mrs. Lorna Dale again. Her eyes widened as she saw the empty tray. Mrs. Lorna. Well, looks like you actually ran out. Emily wasn't sure if it was shock or irritation in the woman's voice. Caleb answered for her, his tone calm and unbothered. Caleb. She didn't run out. They were enjoyed. Mrs. Lorna stiffened. Mrs. Lorna. Well, good for her. Perhaps next year she can. Caleb cut her off gently. Caleb. She'll be entering again next year. And I'll be here to taste the first one. Lorna swallowed and forced a stiff, polite nod before walking away. Emily turned to Caleb, awed and bewildered. Emily, you didn't have to do that. Caleb. I know. He wasn't looking for thanks. He wasn't trying to rescue her. He simply believed in her. And that felt like another miracle tonight. Caleb tucked his hands into his coat pockets. Caleb. Do you mind if I walk you home after all this? Emily's heart fluttered. Emily. I'd like that. And there, in the quiet glow of the square, something soft and real began forming between them. Not from grand gestures. Not from flattery. But from the simple act of tasting one woman's forgotten courage. And finding in it a feeling he thought he'd lost forever. Home. The square had mostly emptied after the surprise around Emily's tray. Strings of lights swung gently in the breeze, and the last of the festival-goers drifted toward the warmth of the tavern and the choir's carols. The lights painted puddles of gold on the snow, and the smell of roasting chestnuts hung in the air. Emily began to fold the cloth over the cooling tray, hands moving on autopilot. Her chest still hummed with the aftershock of Caleb's compliment. People had tasted her cookies and had liked them. Even Pastor Grant had been proud. Still, the old knot of shame and self-consciousness twisted in her stomach. It didn't unravel in one night. A shadow fell across her table. She looked up. Caleb Warren stood there, boots leaving dark indentations in the snow, his coat dusted with powdery flakes. He looked like he belonged to the open range rather than a town festival. Up close, his gaze was softer than his reputation, a quiet, careful kindness that had nothing to do with showmanship. Mind if I stand here a minute? He asked. Emily's throat tightened. No. Yes, you can. Of course. He slid into the space beside her as if he'd always been welcome, and his presence felt steadier than any warmth from a hearth. They stood in companionable silence for a few breaths, the world reduced to falling snow and the small sound of someone in the distance tuning a fiddle. Caleb reached for a cookie, then hesitated, looking at her. You heading home soon? He asked, casual but with an edge of concern. Emily shrugged, folding the cloth tighter around the tray. I usually walk. My aunt's house isn't far. It's slippery tonight, though. Caleb watched the light skitter across her face. Roads are slick. I was planning to head out now. If you don't mind the company, I can walk you. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, relief and something else, nervousness, flaring at his offer. No one had offered to walk her home before. Most people barely met her eyes. I'd like that, she said softly. They walked side by side down the brick path, their footsteps aligning. Caleb's lantern cast a warm pool on the snow. For a while they let the town hum around them without words. When they did speak, it was in short sentences that opened into quieter confessions. You seem surprised back there, Caleb said, glancing at her. Emily stole a look at him. I didn't think anyone like you'd pay attention. People usually laugh first and listen later. Caleb's jaw tightened for a moment. Some folks are quick to judge. But you tasted like something the town forgot, simple and honest. My mouth remembered home and I couldn't help but say it. Emily's hands found each other, fingers entwined to hide their trembling. My grandmother taught me this recipe. She said the right spice can make a house feel like a home. Caleb smiled, and the small movement made the lines at his eyes soften. Sounds like a wise woman. They turned off the main road onto the narrow lane that led past the town's old cemetery and out toward the row of houses. Snow muffled their steps. The moon painted sepia shadows across the fields. At a low wooden fence that bordered Emily's aunt's yard, Caleb paused. This is me, she said, voice shy. The house was small and squat, smoke curling from the chimney. A single wreath hung on the door. Caleb nodded but didn't move to leave. He took off his hat and scratched behind his ear, a small human gesture that chased away formality. Emily, he said, the name steady in his mouth. My mother used to set a place at the table for folks who needed a warm meal. My wife did too. I suppose I never stopped noticing the little things that bring people together. Emily looked down. You don't have to. I know. He reached into his coat and produced a small tin tied with twine. The tin was dented and plain. I brought some coffee from the ranch. Thought you might like a cup tomorrow when you teach me that recipe. She blinked, stunned. You want me to teach you? He let out a quiet laugh. If you're willing. I'm clumsy with measurements, but I listen well. For a second her mind flashed to every time she'd been told to aim lower, to hide. This was different. This was an invitation, not pity. This was someone asking to learn from her, not to fix her. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'd like that. Good. He straightened, shifting the tin in his hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Tomorrow then. Come by the ranch when the sun's high. I'll have the kettle on. She held the lantern for him a few seconds, feeling the warmth seep into her gloves. I'll bring the dough. They lingered in the shared silence that followed, the comfortable kind that says more than speech. Then Caleb bowed his head in a small old-fashioned goodbye. Emily Hart, he said as if saying her full name made it real, you bake like someone who's seen the best parts of life. Don't hide that. Her throat tightened. Thank you, Caleb. He tipped his hat and walked back toward the lane, lantern bobbing. Emily stood for a moment watching his silhouette blend with the snow, then turned toward her aunt's door. The house smelled of broth and lavender. Her aunt dozed in her chair with a shawl over her knees. Emily smoothed the cloth over the empty tray and felt a new kind of lightness. Tonight had been more than a small victory, it had been the first page of something she hadn't dared hope for. Inside, she placed the tray on the counter and traced a finger over the cooling cookie marks. The house seemed somehow larger, not because the walls had changed but because her world had widened. She set the tin of coffee on the table, then sat and folded her hands. Outside, Caleb walked back toward his horse, the lantern swinging, the ranch road leading him home. He paused once and looked back at the dim glow of Emily's window. Then he turned, as if answering some quiet promise he'd made to himself the moment he tasted that first cookie. That night, neither of them slept heavy. They both turned over small images in their minds. A tray of simple cookies, a tin tied with twine, a walk home under lantern light. Both held a warmth that had nothing to do with hearths or stoves. A warmth that came from being noticed and being asked to stay. The late morning sun glowed pale over the Warren Ranch, spreading a sheet of gold across the frost-tipped grass. Emily Hart walked slowly toward the porch, clutching a bowl of carefully chilled cookie dough. Her heart thudded loud enough to echo in her ears. She'd hardly slept. Every moment of the night before had replayed in her mind. The way Caleb had spoken her full name as if it mattered, the quiet invitation to teach him her grandmother's recipe, the way he'd walked her home without treating her like a burden. And now here she was, standing at the edge of his porch, staring at the sturdy door of a man she barely knew but somehow trusted. You can turn around, she whispered to herself. No one would blame you if you did. But she didn't. She knocked. The door swung open almost immediately. Caleb Warren stood there, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly mussed as if he'd already been working since dawn. He looked momentarily surprised, not that she had arrived, but that she had the courage to step onto his porch. There you are, he said, voice warming instantly. Wasn't sure if you'd come. Emily lifted the bowl a little higher. I brought the dough. Caleb's mouth curved into a quiet smile, a slow, gentle thing that reached all the way to his eyes. Come on in, Emily Hart. Inside the ranch house. The warmth hit her first, not from the fireplace but from the home itself. The air carried a mixture of strong coffee, pine wood, and something sweet she couldn't place. On the table sat a kettle and 2 enamel mugs. Caleb moved ahead and pulled a chair back for her. You can take that spot, he said. Best light hits it. Reckon that's important for dough teaching. Emily sat, hands small around the bowl. You didn't have to make coffee, she murmured. I promised, remember? Caleb chuckled. Kettle was on since sunrise. She looked at him. You wake up at sunrise? Earlier, he answered, pouring her a cup. Ranch keeps its own schedule. He sat across from her, leaning forward. Well, teacher, he said with a playfulness she wasn't used to, what's the first step? Emily blinked. No one had ever asked her to teach them anything, especially not something from her grandmother. First, the dough needs warmth, she said quietly. Not too much. Just enough so it's soft but not sticky. Caleb pushed the bowl toward her. You show me. Her hands were gentle as she loosened the cloth and touched the dough, checking the temperature with practiced care. You learned this from your grandma? Caleb asked softly. Emily nodded. When I was little. She always said we mix dough how we mix life, slow with the heart, never rushing. Caleb's brow softened. She sounds like someone I'd have trusted. Emily's chest warmed. I think you would have liked her. Caleb hesitated. She would have liked you too, I bet. Her breath caught. Compliments always startled her, but from him they didn't sting with doubt. They felt anchored. A moment of laughter. Caleb rolled up his sleeves and reached for the dough. You mind if I try? He asked. Emily nodded. He pressed his hands into the dough, a little too firmly. It squished up between his fingers and flopped sideways. Emily gasped. Then she laughed. It escaped involuntarily, light, unguarded, warm. Caleb froze mid-squeeze. That was wrong, wasn't it? She covered her mouth, still laughing. A little? He smirked. Figured. Then he added, softer. But it was worth it to hear you laugh. Emily stopped. Her face heated. His words weren't loud, but they were steady, the kind that carried no mockery, no hidden meaning. Just honesty. Their eyes held for one heartbeat more than strangers were supposed to. The smell of something new. Soon the kitchen filled with the aroma of cinnamon, vanilla, and butter, drifting through the beams and toward the living room, curling like memory and promise. Caleb inhaled deeply. Smells like my childhood. Haven't had that in years. Emily looked at him. Did your mother bake? Only at Christmas, he said quietly. She passed when I was young. After that, well, his voice softened. Holidays got quieter. Emily's heart squeezed. I'm sorry, Caleb. He shrugged one shoulder gently. Life hands everyone something. I got the ranch, the land, the cattle. Enough to keep me from thinking too much. Emily pressed the dough lightly. Maybe cookies can help with that. He looked at her. I reckon you're right. A knock at the door. A sharp rapping on the porch startled them both. Caleb frowned. That'll be Mrs. Lorna Dale or Pastor Grant. They mentioned stopping by to check on the festival cleanup. Emily immediately panicked. I should hide, I don't want people thinking. Caleb stood, firm but calm. Emily Hart, you're baking in my kitchen. You're not hiding. Another knock. He opened the door. Inside stepped Mrs. Lorna Dale, brushing snow from her coat. Oh. Caleb, good morning. She stopped when she saw Emily at the kitchen table. Her eyes widened slightly. Not in judgment. In surprise. My goodness, is that the cookie dough from last night? Emily flushed. Why, yes, ma'am. Mrs. Dale inhaled deeply. Mercy. It smells like the Christmases my mother used to make. Is this what you'll enter in the finals on Christmas Eve? Emily froze. The finals? Mrs. Dale's face lit up. Darling, didn't Caleb tell you? You've been moved to the final round. Caleb shot Emily an apologetic wince. I was going to tell you after we baked a batch. Emily's eyes widened. I made the finals? Mrs. Dale nodded. People are still talking about your cookies. They said it reminded them of home. Emily's eyes slowly filled with tears, the overwhelmed kind. Caleb stepped subtly closer to her, his presence grounding. You earned it. Every bit. She clutched the edge of the table, trying to steady her breath. Mrs. Dale clasped her hands. I'll leave you two to finish. Pastor Grant will want to know you're practicing. She winked at Emily, an encouraging wink, not the kind people used to give her behind her back, and stepped out. The door clicked shut. Caleb turned to her. You all right? He asked softly. Emily swallowed. I don't know. No one has ever believed in something I made. He wiped flour from her cheek with the back of his hand, gentle, respectful. I believe in you, he said. Even before the finals. Her breath hitched. She stared at him, unsure if she was imagining the tenderness in his voice. Now, he said, giving the dough a playful nudge, Teacher, we got cookies to bake. Emily's heart steadied. Because for the first time in her life, she felt strong enough to believe it too. Snow fell in soft, steady flakes the next evening as the town gathered inside the fellowship hall for the Christmas bake-off finals. Candle lanterns lined the windows, casting gold sparkles across the room. Garlands wrapped around the rafters, and a pine wreath hung over the stage, where long tables displayed the finalists' entries. Emily Hart stood near the back wall, bundled in her aunt's old shawl, clutching the tray of warm cookies she and Caleb had baked that morning at the ranch. The smell of cinnamon drifted around her like a protective halo. But her stomach churned. She wasn't used to attention. And tonight she seemed to be the center of it. People whispered. Some smiled softly. A few still smirked, but for the first time, their whispers weren't the loudest voices in the room. Caleb Warren arrived beside her, as steady as always. Evenin', Emily, he said, brushing snow off his coat. His presence, warm and grounded, eased her tension instantly. You okay? He asked quietly. She shook her head. I don't think I can do this. Everyone's looking at me. Caleb tilted his head. Let them. You're here because you deserve to be. Emily's breath fogged in the cold air of the hall. But, what if they laugh again? Caleb leaned in, tone firm but soft. Then they'll answer to me. She blinked at him. His jaw was set, his eyes steady. Caleb Warren didn't say things for effect. He meant every word. Her heart thudded. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you set on the table. They walked together toward the stage, passing murmurs of recognition. Is that Emily Hart? She made it to the finals? Those cookies are the ones Pastor Grant talked about? Emily felt her knees wobble, but Caleb walked just slightly behind her, not guiding, not touching, but standing close enough that she felt supported. Mrs. Lorna Dale greeted them at the judges' table. Oh, Emily dear. There you are, she exclaimed. Everyone's been waiting to see your entry. Emily swallowed. I hope they still like them. Mrs. Dale chuckled. Darling, the festival committee demanded we add more slots because of your cookies. You brought something warm back to this town. Emily blushed fiercely. Caleb's smile was quiet and proud. Told you. Emily set the tray down. The cookies, rustic and imperfect, glowed under the lantern light. Their golden edges and dusting of cinnamon sugar looked humble compared to the other contestants' elaborate pastries and glazed sculptures. But when Emily stepped back, she noticed something. People leaned toward her tray first. Not because it was fancy, but because it was familiar. Comforting. Like the smell of a childhood kitchen. Pastor Grant took the stage. His deep voice rolled through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Christmas Bake-Off Finals. Tonight we celebrate flavor, tradition, and heart. And this year, we also celebrate courage. Emily stiffened. Pastor Grant continued, eyes searching the crowd until he found her. This year's surprise finalist, Miss Emily Hart, reminded us that the simplest things, when made with love, can touch the spirit more than the most extravagant creations. A soft wave of murmurs swept the hall. Emily's hands shook. Caleb touched her sleeve. A silent I'm here. The tasting begins. The judges sampled each entry in order. Excitement buzzed through the hall, but when they reached Emily's cookies, the room shifted. Mrs. Dale broke one in half, steam rising from its center. Pastor Grant took a careful bite. The third judge, old Mr. Carver, closed his eyes as he chewed. Silence spread. Then, Pastor Grant exhaled sharply, almost emotionally. It tastes, he said, voice thick, like my mother's kitchen on Christmas morning. Mrs. Dale wiped the corner of her eye. Heavens, this flavor. I haven't tasted this kind of warmth in years. Mr. Carver nodded slowly. This is the taste of home. The murmur turned to a full-on hush. All eyes shifted to Emily. And for the first time in her entire life, the entire town looked at her with something she had never ever received from them. Respect. But not everyone was thrilled. A small cluster of townsfolk exchanged sour looks. Some whispers floated through. She doesn't even look like a finalist. How did she beat the other bakers? It's just luck. Emily heard them. She always heard those kinds of comments. They were stamped into her memory like scars. Her shoulders started to fold inward. But Caleb stepped to her side, voice low, calm, unshakable. Look at me. She looked up. You did this, he said. Not luck. Not charity. And no one can take it from you. Her chest tightened. Tears pricked her eyes. Announcement time. Mrs. Dale lifted the microphone. The winner will be announced shortly, she said. Judges need a moment to tally. The tension was thick. Emily stepped back from the crowd, trying to breathe. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear. Caleb followed her, stopping a few feet away to give her space while still anchoring her presence. Emily Hart, he said softly, no matter what they announce, you changed something tonight. She looked at him, eyes trembling. What did I change? Caleb didn't hesitate. You made this town remember what kindness tastes like. Her breath hitched. And, he added quietly, you made me remember too. Emily looked down quickly, overwhelmed. Caleb's voice deepened just a touch, enough to make her chest flutter unexpectedly. And I don't forget lessons like that. The crowd shifted, judges returning to the stage. Emily froze. Caleb tilted his head, whispering, whatever happens, I'm right here. And he was, standing beside her, solid, warm, unmoving. The hall quieted as Mrs. Dale stepped forward with the results. Emily's fingertips tingled. Her breath shook. The moment felt bigger than a contest. Bigger than baking. Bigger than the girl who had once been laughed at for bringing a simple Christmas cookie. Because now, Now the entire town waited to hear her name. The hall went silent. So silent Emily Hart could hear her own heartbeat echo against the wooden rafters. Mrs. Lorna Dale stood at the front with an envelope in hand, her face glowing with excitement. Pastor Grant and Mr. Carver flanked her, their expressions warm and proud. The entire room leaned forward. Emily felt Caleb Warren's steady presence at her side. She didn't dare look at him, she was too afraid she'd fall apart if she did. Mrs. Dale lifted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this year's Bake-Off winner is..." A long pause. A breath. A heartbeat. Emily Hart. The hall erupted. Gasp. Cheers. Applause that sounded like a wave hitting shore. Emily froze. She had expected disappointment, embarrassment, maybe even laughter. But not this. Not the entire town clapping for her. Her eyes filled instantly. She covered her mouth with both hands as disbelief crashed over her. Caleb leaned in, voice low and warm enough to melt winter itself. "Told you." Her tears slipped free. Walking to the stage. She moved forward slowly, her legs barely carrying her. She felt eyes on her from every angle, but for the first time in her life, those eyes weren't mocking. They were proud. Grateful. Some townsfolk even called out, "That's our Emily. You earned it, dear." "Bless you, child, those cookies healed something in me." Emily wiped her cheeks, unable to fully understand what was happening. Mrs. Dale met her at the steps and squeezed her hands tight. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, "thank you. Truly. This town needed your recipe more than it knew." Pastor Grant stepped forward next. His voice trembled slightly. "My mother used to bake something very close to yours. I haven't tasted anything like it in decades. You brought her memory back tonight." Emily's lip trembled so hard she couldn't answer. Mr. Carver gently placed the ribbon over her shoulders and said, "This wasn't a victory of fancy baking. This was a victory of soul." Emily let out a shaky breath. Soul. Her cookie had soul. The town's apology. As Emily stepped off the stage, something unexpected happened. Several townspeople who had once laughed at her, people who had whispered behind her back at markets, people who had giggled when she walked past, began approaching her. One woman wrung her hands nervously. "Emily, I'm sorry. For how we acted before. We didn't see you right." A man bowed his head. "Forgive us. The way we treated you wasn't Christian." Two teenage girls who had snickered at her cookie the night before stepped up with watery eyes. "We were wrong," one said. "You're amazing." Emily didn't know what to say. Her heart was tender, aching, overwhelmed. She managed a small nod. "Thank you." Caleb had his arms folded as he watched, not smugly, not triumphantly, just quietly proud of her. When the crowd finally parted, Caleb stepped in front of her. Up close, his eyes reflected the warm lantern light. "You changed this whole room," he murmured. Emily shook her head. "I just made cookies." "No," he said, gentle but certain. "You made a memory. A moment outside." A soft snowfall had begun again, powder drifting in sheets of white as the townspeople exited. The world outside glowed under lamplight. Emily stepped out into the cold to breathe. She hugged her shawl tighter. Caleb followed her, hands tucked into his coat pockets. "You did it," he said softly. Emily looked at him, eyes shining with leftover tears. "I never thought people would ever clap for me." Caleb's breath formed a cloud in the air between them. "Maybe it wasn't the cookie." She blinked. "What do you mean?" Caleb stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the warmth radiating off him. "Maybe it was you," he said. "Your courage. Your heart. The way you've lived, quietly, humbly, but full of goodness." Emily's throat tightened. "I don't feel courageous." "You are," he said simply. "You showed up in a place that once hurt you. You offered them something anyway. That's bravery." Emily looked down, snowflakes catching on her lashes. "You make me feel like I matter." Caleb reached out and gently tipped her chin upward with one rough fingertip. "You do matter. Emily Hart, you matter more than this whole town knows." She couldn't breathe for a second. Caleb's voice softened even more, low and warm. "I don't want this to be the last time we bake together." Her pulse stuttered. "You don't?" He shook his head slowly. "I'm hoping it's the first of many things we'll do together." Emily stared at him. This rancher who didn't see her size first, who didn't see her awkwardness, who didn't see what others mocked. He saw her. Her heart. Her hands. Her courage. Her goodness. Her grandmother's legacy. And she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to think. She wanted that future too. A new Christmas tradition. Caleb held out his hand. Not grabbing. Not demanding. Just offering. "Walk with me?" he asked quietly. Emily placed her hand in his. Caleb's fingers wrapped around hers, warm and steady. They walked down the snowy street together, lantern light making long shadows behind them. The town buzzed with music and laughter in the distance, but Emily felt as if she'd stepped into a story she had never believed she deserved. "Caleb?" she whispered after a long silence. "Yeah. Thank you for seeing me." He squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for letting me." Snow continued falling. Christmas lights twinkled along rooftops. And Emily Hart, the girl whose Christmas cookie had once been laughed at, walked into the night beside a man who tasted her baking and said it tasted like home. Because maybe, just maybe, she was home to him.